The wine glass trembled slightly in Luca Rossi's weathered hand as he brought it toward his lips. The deep red liquid caught the dim light of Rosa's restaurant, swirling like liquid rubies in the crystal. Around him, the soft murmur of evening conversations and clinking silverware created the perfect backdrop for what should have been another peaceful dinner. Luca had been coming to this same corner table every Tuesday for 3 years. Table 7, tucked away in the shadows where he could see every entrance, every face that walked through the door. Tonight felt different, though. The air seemed thicker, charged with an energy he couldn't quite place. The young bartender had been watching him all evening. Nico, Rosa had called him. Dark hair, nervous eyes that kept darting between the bar and Luca's table. Most people avoided looking at Luca Rossi directly. In his world, eye contact could be seen as a challenge, and challenges often ended badly. But this kid was different. He moved with purpose behind the bar, polishing glasses that were already clean, organizing bottles that were already perfectly arranged. His movements were too deliberate, too focused for someone simply doing their job. Luca raised the wine glass higher, savoring the rich aroma that promised the perfect end to his meal. The vintage was exceptional, a 1997 Barolo that Rosa had specially recommended. She knew his tastes well after all these years. That's when it happened. A flash of movement caught his peripheral vision. The bartender was walking toward his table, a small piece of paper folded between his fingers. Luca's bodyguard, Gino, immediately tensed in his chair across the table, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Boss," whispered Gino, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. But Luca held up a subtle hand, curious about this unexpected interruption. The young man approached with careful steps, his face pale but determined. Without a word, he placed the folded paper on the white tablecloth and stepped back, his eyes never leaving Luca's face. The wineglass was still inches from Luca's lips when he unfolded the note with his free hand. The handwriting was hurried but clear, written in blue ink that had smudged slightly from nervous fingers. "Don't drink it. Smile and use the back door now." Time seemed to freeze. The wineglass hung suspended in the air as Luca's mind raced through possibilities. Poison. It had to be poison. Someone had finally made a move against him, and they'd chosen the one place he'd always felt safe. His dark eyes flicked up to meet Nico's gaze. The young bartender stood perfectly still, but Luca could see the fear and determination warring in his expression. This wasn't a threat, this was a warning. Gino had noticed the exchange now, his body coiled like a spring ready to unleash violence. Other diners continued their meals, completely unaware that death had just been served at table 7. Luca's mind calculated rapidly. If the wine was poisoned, who had access? When had it been tampered with? How much time did he have before whoever orchestrated this realized their plan had failed? The restaurant suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every innocent face could belong to an assassin waiting for confirmation of his death. Rosa appeared at the edge of his vision, her usual warm smile seeming forced tonight. Had she been part of this? The woman who had served him countless meals, who knew his preferences, his schedule, his habits? The wineglass felt heavier now, its contents transformed from pleasure to poison in a single moment. Luca could smell the rich bouquet, could almost taste the complex flavors that would have delighted his palate. Instead, each drop represented a step closer to his grave. Nico remained motionless, waiting. The young man had risked everything to deliver this warning. In Luca's world, such actions demanded either reward or punishment, and the choice would determine not just Nico's fate, but potentially Luca's own survival. The wineglass hovered in the air, suspended between life and death, as Luca Rossi made the decision that would change everything. 3 hours earlier, the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city echoed with the sound of footsteps on concrete. Carlo Betti adjusted his expensive suit jacket as he walked between rusted machinery and broken windows, his polished shoes clicking against the dusty floor. The setting was deliberately chosen, neutral ground where neither family held advantage. Sal emerged from the shadows like a ghost, his thin frame and pale complexion making him appear almost skeletal in the dim light filtering through cracked skylights. He carried a small leather case, the kind doctors once used for house calls, though the contents served a far different purpose. "You're certain about the timing?" Carlo asked, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. "Every Tuesday, 8 o'clock sharp, table 7, corner position. He always orders the same wine." Sal's voice was soft, almost gentle, which made his profession all the more unsettling. "Rosa's restaurant has become predictable. Rossi thinks he's safe there." Carlo smiled, but there was no warmth in it. For 20 years he had lived in Luca Rossi's shadow, watching opportunities slip away, seeing his own family's influence diminish while Luca's grew stronger. Tonight would change everything. "Show me," Carlo commanded. Sal opened his case with practiced precision. Inside, nestled in custom foam, lay a small vial containing clear liquid. Next to it sat a syringe so thin it was barely visible. Ricin derivative, modified for faster action. Tasteless, odorless, undetectable in wine. The beauty is in its simplicity. It mimics a heart attack perfectly. Even the best coroner would find nothing suspicious. Sal's fingers traced the vial lovingly. One drop in his glass, and Luca Rossi becomes history. Meanwhile, across the city, Nico tied his apron strings and checked his watch. 7:30. Rosa's restaurant was already filling with the evening crowd, the soft lighting and warm atmosphere creating the perfect illusion of safety and comfort. Rosa herself seemed different tonight. Usually calm and composed, she kept checking her phone, her fingers drumming nervously against the hostess stand. When Nico approached to ask about the evening's wine selection, she jumped as if he'd fired a gun. "The usual setup," she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. "And Nico, when the wine delivery arrives, I'll handle it personally. Don't worry about restocking tonight." Something in her tone made Nico pause. In the 6 months he'd worked here, Rosa had never handled deliveries herself. She trusted her staff completely, often joking that she paid them to work so she didn't have to. "Everything okay, Rosa?" he asked gently. Her smile was too bright, too forced. "Of course, dear. Just a special vintage coming in. Very expensive. I want to make sure it's handled properly." Back at the warehouse, Carlo was reviewing the final details. "Rosa understands her position. Completely. Her grandson's safety depends on her cooperation. She'll ensure the right bottle reaches the right table." Sal closed his case with a soft click. "I'll arrive as the delivery man at 7:45. By 8:15, Luca Rossi will be dead, and you'll control both territories." Carlo nodded, already imagining the power that would soon be his. "And if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong, but if it does, Rosa takes the blame. A desperate restaurant owner drowning in debt makes a deal with rivals. The story writes itself." As 8 o'clock approached, Sal walked through Rosa's front door carrying a wooden crate marked with an expensive wine label. He wore the uniform of a legitimate delivery service, complete with clipboard and professional smile. To any observer, he was simply a working man doing his job. Rosa met him at the entrance, her hands visibly shaking as she signed the delivery receipt. "Table 7?" whispered Rosa. "Table 7," Sal confirmed, following her toward the bar. Nico watched from behind the counter as the stranger carefully placed a single bottle on the back shelf, making a small scratch on the label with his fingernail. The mark was barely visible, but Nico's sharp eyes caught the deliberate motion. Something was very wrong. The delivery man left as quietly as he'd arrived, but the bottle remained, waiting like a loaded weapon for its intended target. Nico's hands moved automatically as he polished wine glasses, but his mind was racing back to conversations he'd tried to forget. His father, Antonio Moretti, had been a simple mechanic who'd gotten caught in the wrong place at the wrong time 20 years ago. On his deathbed 2 years earlier, Antonio had told Nico stories that seemed like fairy tales. Stories about honor among thieves, about a young mafia boss who'd shown mercy when others demanded blood. There was this man, Luca Rossi, his father had whispered from his hospital bed. Everyone said he was ruthless, but when he could have killed me for witnessing something I shouldn't have seen, he let me walk away. Told me to take my family and start fresh. Said good men shouldn't pay for being in the wrong place. At the time, Nico had dismissed it as fever dreams. His father had always been prone to dramatic stories. But now, watching Rosa's nervous behavior and remembering the deliberate scratch on that wine bottle, those old stories took on new meaning. The restaurant's phone rang, and Rosa answered with trembling fingers. Nico pretended to organize bottles while straining to hear her conversation. "Yes, I understand," Rosa whispered into the receiver. "Table 7 gets the special bottle, the one with the mark." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please, you promised my grandson would be safe if I cooperated." Nico's blood turned cold. Rosa wasn't just nervous, she was terrified. Someone was forcing her to participate in something terrible, using her family as leverage. The marked bottle wasn't special wine, it was something far more sinister. He glanced toward the back shelf where the delivery man had placed the bottle. From this angle, he could barely see the small scratch, but it was there, marking it like a target. His father's words echoed in his memory. Luca Rossi showed mercy when others demanded blood. The front door chimed, and Nico looked up to see a man in an expensive suit scanning the restaurant. Even from across the room, there was something predatory about his movements, the way his eyes cataloged every face, every exit. He took a seat at a table with a clear view of the corner booth, table 7. Rosa hung up the phone and immediately busied herself with meaningless tasks, her movements jerky and unnatural. When she caught Nico watching her, she forced another brittle smile. "Busy night ahead," she said, her voice too high. "We're expecting some very important guests." Nico nodded, but his attention was drawn to the marked bottle. In the restaurant's warm lighting, the wine looked innocent enough, but he couldn't shake the feeling that death was sitting on that shelf, waiting to be served. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister, Mia. "Working late at the library again, don't wait up." The simple message reminded him of everything he had to lose. Mia was in her second year of college, brilliant and full of dreams. She depended on him completely since their father's death. Whatever was happening here tonight, he couldn't afford to get involved. But as he watched Rosa's hands shake while she arranged menus, he thought about the stories his father had told, about honor, about protecting innocent people, about a man who'd chosen mercy over violence when it would have been easier to choose death. The man in the expensive suit checked his watch and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Rosa approached the bar, her face pale. "Nico, when our special guests arrive, they'll want table 7, and they'll want—" She swallowed hard. "They'll want the wine from the marked bottle, the one that was just delivered." Nico said quietly, "What's really happening here?" For a moment, her composure completely cracked. "I can't. My grandson, he's only 8 years old. They have photos of him walking to school, playing in the park. They know his schedule better than I do." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I never wanted this. I just wanted to run a restaurant, feed people, make them happy." The front door opened again, and this time Nico recognized the face from newspaper photos. Luca Rossi walked in with a large man who was obviously his bodyguard, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who owned whatever room he entered. Rosa straightened her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and walked toward table 7 with a smile that looked like it might shatter at any moment. Nico stared at the marked bottle, his father's voice whispering in his memory about mercy and honor, while death waited patiently to be poured. Luca Rossi moved through Rosa's restaurant like a man who owned the world, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. His bodyguard Gino followed 2 steps behind, eyes constantly scanning the room with professional paranoia. They'd performed this ritual every Tuesday for 3 years, and the routine had become as comfortable as an old coat. Rosa greeted them at the entrance, her smile bright enough to power the restaurant's lighting. But Nico noticed what others missed. The way her hands trembled as she clutched the menus, the slight tremor in her voice as she welcomed her most important customer. "Mr. Rossi, so wonderful to see you again," she said, leading them toward the corner booth. "I have something very special for you tonight. A wine that just arrived, a vintage I think you'll find unforgettable." Luca settled into his usual seat, back to the wall, facing the room. Gino took the opposite chair, positioning himself to watch the entrance and kitchen simultaneously. The routine was so practiced, it looked like a dance they'd performed 1,000 times. From behind the bar, Nico watched Rosa's performance with growing dread. She was trying too hard, her enthusiasm forced and unnatural. When she mentioned the special wine, her voice caught slightly on the word unforgettable, as if the irony was choking her. The man in the expensive suit, Sal, though Nico didn't know his name, sat 3 tables away, nursing a glass of water and pretending to read a newspaper. But his eyes never left table 7, and Nico noticed he hadn't turned a single page in 20 minutes. "The special wine," Rosa continued, her voice growing stronger as she committed to her role. "It's a 1997 Barolo, absolutely exquisite. I've been saving it for someone who would truly appreciate its unique qualities." Luca nodded approvingly. "You know my tastes well, Rosa. Bring it when you're ready." As Rosa walked toward the bar, Nico saw her pause at a table near the kitchen where she whispered something to a man he hadn't noticed before. The man nodded and moved closer to the back exit. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They weren't just planning to poison Luca, they were making sure he couldn't escape. Rosa reached the bar, her face pale but determined. "The marked bottle," she whispered to Nico. "Pour it carefully, don't spill a drop." Nico's hands felt numb as he reached for the bottle. The glass was cool against his palms, and for a moment he imagined he could feel the evil contained within. His father's stories flooded back, tales of honor, of choosing right over easy, of a man who'd shown mercy when the world expected violence. He thought about Mia, studying late at the library, trusting him to keep their small world safe. He thought about Rosa, trapped between her grandson's safety and her conscience. He thought about Luca Rossi, sitting peacefully at table 7, completely unaware that death was being poured into Tristal. The wine flowed like liquid darkness, its rich color hiding the colorless poison that would stop a heart within minutes. Nico's hands shook as he placed the glass on a silver tray, the crystal catching the restaurant's warm light and throwing tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. "Take it to him," Rosa whispered, her voice barely audible. "And Nico, I'm sorry. For everything." The walk from the bar to table 7 felt like crossing a battlefield. Each step brought him closer to a moment that would define not just his own future, but the fate of everyone in the restaurant. Sal's eyes tracked his movement, and Nico could feel the weight of that predatory gaze. Luca looked up as Nico approached, his dark eyes curious about this break in routine. Usually, Rosa served the wine herself, making a small ceremony of the presentation. Tonight, she remained at the bar, gripping its edge like a lifeline. Nico set the glass down with careful precision, the poisoned wine swirling gently in its crystal prison. Luca's fingers moved toward the stem, and Nico knew he had perhaps 30 seconds before those fingers lifted the glass to lips that would never speak again. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Good men shouldn't pay for being in the wrong place. Tonight, Nico realized, he was the one in the wrong place, but unlike his father 20 years ago, he had a choice to make. The pen felt heavy in his pocket as Luca's fingers closed around the wine glass. The note hit the table like a thunderbolt, and Luca's reaction was immediate. Without hesitation, he set down the wine glass and stood with casual grace, his movements betraying none of the alarm racing through his mind. "Gino," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority that had kept him alive for decades. "We're leaving through the kitchen. Security concern." Gino's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Luca's subtle gesture stopped him. They needed to appear calm, unhurried. Any sign of panic would trigger whatever trap was waiting to spring. Across the restaurant, Sal's newspaper crumpled in his fists as he watched Luca stand without drinking. Something had gone wrong. His eyes darted to the wine glass, still full, still deadly, sitting abandoned on the white tablecloth like an accusation. Sal pulled out his phone and sent a quick text. Package refused. Initiate backup. Within seconds, 2 men near the front entrance stood and began moving toward table 7. Another man by the restroom pushed back his chair. The trap was closing, but Luca was already 3 steps ahead. "This way," Nico whispered urgently, appearing beside their table. "The kitchen leads to the back alley. I know these streets." Luca's eyes met Nico's for a split second, and in that moment, a decision was made. Trust was a luxury Luca rarely afforded strangers, but the young bartender had already proven his worth with the warning note. They moved through the restaurant's dining room with practiced nonchalance, Luca nodding to familiar faces while Gino's eyes tracked every potential threat. Rosa watched from behind the bar, her face a mask of terror as she realized her part in the evening's drama was far from over. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and steam. Busy cooks focused on their orders, unaware that death was walking through their workspace. Nico led them past the prep stations toward a heavy door marked Emergency Exit. "Stop right there," a voice called from behind them. They turned to see Sal standing in the kitchen doorway, no longer bothering with his delivery man disguise. His hand rested inside his jacket, the outline of a weapon clearly visible. "The evening isn't over, Mr. Rossi. You have an appointment to keep." Gino moved like lightning, his gun appearing in his hand as he stepped between Sal and Luca. But Sal wasn't alone. The 2 men from the dining room flanked him, their own weapons drawn. 3 against 2, Sal smiled coldly. "And we control the front exit. This doesn't have to be messy, but it will be final." The kitchen staff scattered like startled birds, abandoning their posts and diving behind prep counters. Pots clattered to the floor as chaos erupted in the confined space. "The alley!" Nico hissed, pushing open the emergency door. They burst into the narrow space behind the restaurant, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the kitchen's heat. But their relief was short-lived. 2 more men waited in the shadows, blocking the alley's mouth. "Told you we controlled the exits," Sal's voice echoed from the kitchen doorway behind them. They were trapped in a concrete canyon, brick walls rising on both sides, enemies at both ends. The alley was barely wide enough for a delivery truck, filled with dumpsters and fire escapes that offered little cover. Gino's training kicked in immediately. He grabbed a metal trash can lid, using it as a shield while returning fire. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off brick and steel. "This way," Nico shouted, pointing to a narrow gap between buildings that most people would never notice. Luca followed without question, trusting the young man who'd already saved his life once tonight. They moved through the passage as gunfire erupted behind them, Gino providing cover while backing toward their escape route. The passage led to another alley, then another, a maze of forgotten spaces that Nico navigated with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in these streets. Behind them, shouts and running footsteps echoed off the walls as their pursuers gave chase. "How do you know these streets so well?" Luca asked as they ran. "Grew up here," Nico panted. "Used to hide from bullies in these alleys. Never thought I'd be hiding from killers." They emerged onto a wider street, but their relief was premature. Car engines roared to life as black sedans appeared at both ends of the block, headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting prey. "Dead end," Gino muttered, checking his ammunition. Luca looked around the empty street, calculating odds and options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of places to hide. The black sedans crept forward like hunting cats, their headlights creating harsh shadows in the empty street. Luca pressed his back against the brick wall, his mind racing through possibilities, while Gino counted bullets and Nico's breathing came in sharp gasps. "Why?" Luca asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Why did you save me?" Nico's eyes darted between the approaching cars and Luca's intense stare. My father. His name was Antonio Moretti. The name hit Luca like a physical blow. His expression shifted completely, 20 years of buried memories flooding back in an instant. A young mechanic, wrong place, wrong time, blood on concrete, a choice between mercy and violence. Antonio's son, Luca whispered, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. He told you. He said you let him live when others wanted him dead, said you believed good men shouldn't pay for being in the wrong place. Nico's voice grew stronger. Tonight, I was in the wrong place, but I could choose to be a good man. The sedan stopped, engines idling, car doors opened with metallic clicks that echoed off the surrounding buildings. Sal's voice carried across the street. Nowhere left to run, Rossi. Make this easy on everyone. But Luca was no longer thinking about escape. His phone appeared in his hand, fingers moving with practiced speed. Gino, how many rounds left? 12, maybe 15 if I'm careful. Make 'em count. Luca's call connected. Marco, it's me. Carlo Betty just made his move. Yes, tonight. Rosa's restaurant, then the alley behind 10th Street. He paused, listening. No, I'm alive, but I won't be for long unless you move fast. Across the street, Sal was organizing his men, pointing toward different positions. They had all the time in the world, or so they thought. Nico, Luca said quietly, your father saved my life once by keeping quiet about what he saw. Tonight, you've returned that favor, but this isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I wrote that note. Luca studied the young man's face, seeing echoes of Antonio's quiet courage. Then stay low and follow my lead. The first shot came from a rooftop across the street, but it wasn't aimed at them. One of Sal's men dropped, clutching his shoulder. Then another shot, and another. Luca's network was responding with deadly efficiency. What the hell? Sal spun around, trying to identify the new threat. You made one mistake, Carlo, Luca called out, his voice carrying across the street. You assumed I'd come alone to dinner. You assumed I wouldn't have backup watching the restaurant. You assumed wrong. More gunfire erupted from multiple directions as Luca's soldiers emerged from their concealed positions. The hunters had become the hunted in a matter of seconds. Sal's carefully planned ambush dissolved into chaos. His men scattered, seeking cover behind cars and doorways, but they were caught in a crossfire with no escape routes. Boss, Gino pointed toward the far end of the street, where 3 black SUVs had appeared, disorging armed men who moved with military precision. Within minutes, the street was secured. Sal found himself on his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back, his assassination team either dead or captured. The man who'd seemed so confident in the restaurant now looked like what he truly was, a failed killer facing the consequences of his actions. Luca walked over to where Sal knelt, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Where's Carlo? Sal's defiant glare was his only answer. Rosa's grandson, 8 years old, walks to school every morning at 7:30. Your people have been watching him. He crouched down to Sal's eye level. If anything happens to that boy, if he so much as trips on the sidewalk, I'll hold you personally responsible. Understood? The color drained from Sal's face as he realized his own tactics were being turned against him. Now, Lucas stood, brushing dust from his suit. Where is Carlo Betty? This time, Sal's voice was barely a whisper. The warehouse, Pier 17. He's waiting for confirmation. Luca nodded to his men, who hauled Sal to his feet. He's about to get it. As the street cleared of bodies and evidence, Luca turned to Nico, who stood watching the efficient cleanup with wide eyes. Your father would be proud, Luca said simply, but this isn't over yet. The warehouse at Pier 17 sat like a concrete tomb against the harbor, its broken windows staring blindly across the dark water. Inside, Carlo Betti paced between rusted machinery, checking his phone every few seconds for the confirmation that never came. "Where is he?" Carlo muttered, his expensive shoes clicking against the oil-stained floor. Sal should have called by now. His remaining men shifted nervously in the shadows. They'd heard the distant gunfire from across the city, seen the police sirens racing toward the restaurant district. Something had gone very wrong with their carefully planned assassination. Outside, Luca's convoy approached in silence, headlights off, engines barely audible above the harbor's gentle lapping. 20 years of planning had led to this moment, not Carlo's victory, but his reckoning. Luca stepped from the lead vehicle, Gino at his side, while his soldiers spread out to surround the building. Nico had insisted on coming, despite Luca's protests that the young man had done enough. "This ends tonight," Luca said quietly, checking his weapon. "Carlo's been planning my death for 2 decades. Time to return the favor." They entered through the main door, no longer concerned with stealth. The game was over. Only the final moves remained. Carlo spun around as footsteps echoed through the warehouse, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally fear as he saw Luca walking toward him, very much alive. "Impossible," Carlo breathed. "The poison! Sal never fails." "Sal failed tonight because a good man chose to do the right thing," Luca's voice carried across the empty space. "Something you never understood, Carlo. You always chose fear over loyalty, violence over honor." Carlo's hand moved toward his weapon, but Gino's gun was already trained on him. Around the warehouse, Carlo's men found themselves facing superior numbers and firepower. The trap had become a tomb. 20 years, Carlo snarled, his composure finally cracking. 20 years I've waited for this moment. You think you're untouchable, but everyone dies eventually." "Everyone dies," Luca agreed, stepping closer. "But some deaths have meaning. Others are just waste." "You killed my brother." "Your brother tried to sell drugs to children outside a school. I gave him 3 warnings. He chose his path." Luca's voice remained calm, matter-of-fact, "just like you chose yours tonight when you threatened an innocent woman's grandson." Carlo's laugh was bitter, desperate. "Innocent? There's no such thing in our world. Everyone's dirty, everyone's compromised. That's how it works." "No," Nico stepped forward, surprising everyone. "My father was innocent. Rosa was innocent. Her grandson is innocent. You made them part of your war, but they never chose it." Carlo's eyes fixed on Nico with sudden recognition. "Antonio Moretti's boy. I remember now. Your father saw too much, knew too much. Should have killed him when I had the chance." "But you didn't have the chance, because I chose mercy over murder, because I believed then, as I believe now, that good men shouldn't pay for being in the wrong place." The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of harbor waves. Carlo looked around at his trapped men, at the weapons pointed in his direction, at the empire he'd tried to build, crumbling around him. "You want to know the real irony?" Luca continued. "If you'd been patient, if you'd built your business honestly, there was room for both our families. But you chose poison over partnership. You chose to threaten children." Carlo's hand twitched toward his gun one final time, but he never cleared leather. The sound echoed through the warehouse, final and absolute. In the aftermath, as his men secured the scene, Luca turned to Nico. "Your debt is paid. Your father's honor is restored. But this world," he gestured around the warehouse, "this isn't for you." Nico nodded, understanding. "What about Rosa, her grandson?" "Protected,
always. Luca pulled out a business card, writing something on the back. Give this to your sister. Full scholarship any university she chooses. Your family will never want for anything. As they walked toward the harbor exit, Luca paused. Your father saved my life by staying silent. You saved it by speaking up. Sometimes the right choice changes, but honor remains constant. The warehouse was empty now, its shadows holding only memories of choices made and prices paid. Outside, the harbor reflected city lights like scattered diamonds, beautiful and eternal, while justice found its balance in the darkness.